This video is sponsored by Singular.LIVE. On this channel, we usually cover how to create motion graphics using After Effects or Blender, but for any projects that involve live broadcast graphics, the workflow is a bit painful as it involves pre-rendering animations and then bringing them into a streaming software. Sure, you have Mogers, which are motion graphics templates you can export from After Effects and use directly in Premiere Pro or geometry nodes in Blender, but that still involves pre-rendering. And that's where Singular comes in, a cloud-based platform that provides tools to create and control live graphics overlays. It launched around 2017 and has since grown with each new update, while increasingly being adopted by the most demanding productions ranging from sports, news, corporate events, esports and gaming, just to name a few. It works in your browser so you can build and control graphics from anywhere in the world. Take a look at these customer stories on their website to get a better idea of what is possible, but if you're familiar with After Effects, then this should be very easy for you to pick up as they share a lot of similarities. You can design and animate graphics, create control nodes and link them up to specific properties, even use external data such as with Google Sheets, and have your graphics update at incredibly high rates. Scripting is also supported for more complex graphics that require specific behavior and logic. You control these graphics in real time with what are called control apps by triggering animations, changing titles, and so on. You then use the output URL as a browser source directly in your live streaming software of choice, such as OBS, vMix, or any others. We've even been using it with the Streamlabs and Prism Live phone apps because they too support URL inputs. And that's the whole workflow. You don't have to waste time rendering anything in advance. For any devices that don't accept URL inputs, or if you want to use Singular graphics in post-production, you can use their standalone software Singular Recast to record the output via NDI Tools Studio Monitor while retaining transparency. An example I can give you is with this playoffs bracket graphic, which was already linked to a Google Sheet and had all the info ready from when we were live streaming. So instead of recreating it in After Effects, manually typing in the info and rendering it out, I would record it via NDI and bring that into my editing software. My point is, it can be incorporated into your post-production workflow as well. Use cases of our own include podcasts, football and basketball matches, business events, politics and elections, esports and gaming. There are so many possibilities with this platform that I won't be able to cover for now, such as adaptive features and even interactivity. But the good news is that we're currently working on a course for Singular that will cover every step of the process in depth, so stay tuned for more information on that. As for the pricing, you can start using it right now completely for free. Your final output will have a watermark though, and there are a few output and data limitations, but you can use all of its features as you learn the software and only upgrade when you're ready. You can read through the different offerings on their website. I know it's another subscription pricing model you would have to add to your growing list of monthly expenses, but I would go so far as to say it's underpriced for the value it provides when you compare it to other software and hardware solutions designed specifically for live graphics. And I understand it can be daunting to invest time into learning an entire new software, especially if you just need some simple graphics, or some of you can't justify the monthly cost. In that case, Overlays.Uno is a very easy to use, free alternative that offers a huge catalog of customizable templates that are pre-built with Singular, which you can pick up and start using in your live streams without having to build them from scratch. Free of charge and no limitations. We're gonna do a detailed review on Overlays.Uno, but I wanted to quickly mention it for now. If you still want to create sexy custom graphics, however, let's go through the entire process so you can get familiar with how it all works. Alright, so here we are now in the Singular dashboard, which is where all of your assets live. folders, compositions, control apps, and even uploaded files. On the top right, you'll find some user settings, as well as the output manager, which we'll take a look at later on. There are some helpful resources as well. But let's create a new folder, and we'll call it tutorial. Then go inside of it and right click, and we'll hit new composition, kind of like creating a new composition in After Effects, and we'll call this tutorial as well, and hit create. Now to the right of that, you have the inspector button, which will give you information about the selected element in your dashboard. Now before we open this up, there's also a templates library, which contains a bunch of pre-made templates for you to use right now. So you can, I don't know, maybe grab this one, lower third pop, use this as a template, and that will add it to your dashboard, and you can build on top of that. But we'll remove this, and we'll double click on the tutorial composition, and this is the Composer user interface. As we go along, you'll find that there are a bunch of similarities between Singular and After Effects, and considering that a lot of users who follow this channel are familiar with After Effects, it makes sense to draw comparisons between the two programs. On the left, you have the composition tree, which is where all of our layers live. Then we have the properties panel, where we can control all of the properties of the selected layer. On the bottom right, we have the control nodes panel, where we can create nodes and hook them up to these properties so we can modify them in real time. And of course, we have the preview window, or what I like to call the viewport. On the top left, we have the toolbar, which contains the 5 most commonly used widgets and the folder icon. And we can even add groups or widgets by clicking on the add button. You even have new subcomposition. But now let's create a very simple graphic. We'll hit return to rename this layer to L3, short for lower third, and we'll hit the arrow key to go inside of that subcomposition. And you can see where you are in the composition chain by looking at the top. So if we click on tutorial, we'll go back to the root composition. And in fact, you can use the arrow keys to go in and out of those. And if we duplicate this subcomp with Control D, we can even use up and down arrow keys to move between the layers, and then go right arrow to go inside of that. But we'll go back and delete these other two. Now we'll create a new rectangle, but remember, you can also add that by going over here and clicking widget. And this is where you'll find the 39 currently available widgets. By default, every subcomp will have at least one group, and every new widget you create will be added to the currently selected group. Now we could size down the rectangle itself, but you'll find that it makes more sense to size the group instead. So let's select this value, and we'll hit the shortcut key R for resetting properties. And we'll select the group and size that down instead. Let's say about 50. And we can toggle the bounding box overlay, which will give us this blue outline and show the anchor point, which you can change over here, and you'll see that reflecting in the viewport. And in fact, if you have the bounding box enabled, you can click and hold on the viewport to change the position of this rectangle. But if you're someone who has used design tools in the past, such as Illustrator or Figma, you'll find this to be very limiting, because you can't really scale things down from the corners or even snap the layer to another layer. So I would advise you keep any transform modifications in the properties panel instead. So let's select the rectangle and hit R to reset the position. Uncheck the constraint properties, and let's say set this down to 20%, and we'll move this at the bottom, maybe 30%. Another suggestion is to keep these values in whole numbers, or at least 0.5 if you want to use increment values, because you'll find that it'll slow you down quite a bit if you say use 18.4 or something like that. You can even hold Control, which will allow you to adjust values in 0.01 increments. But let's go back to 20. Now with the rectangle selected, let's set the anchor point to the top, unlink these values, and let's set the Y value to 50%. You'll see now that rectangle is half the size of the group. And to better visualize that, we can select the group, and that's the bounding box. And that was the point I was trying to make. Singular uses percentage values as opposed to pixels in After Effects. So this group's height is 20% of the total composition height. And then of course you have the child layers, which are sized relative to the total size of the parent layer, which in this case is the group. So if we set this to 50%, I just know it's going to be half the size of that entire group. Now we can rename this to top box. We'll set the color to something like blue. Then we'll duplicate it, rename the bottom one to bottom box. Then back to the transform panel, we'll set the anchor point at the bottom. And now you'll see the Y position jump to -50 because again, this is relative to the group. So we'll just reset this to 0 and it will jump perfectly to the bottom of that group. Now we'll go back, we'll set this back to be fully white. And let's disable the bounding box for now. Then we'll create a new text layer by hitting the text widget icon on the toolbar. We'll bring this at the top and let's call it title. Now we could try to reposition this back in place, but that's a bit of a hassle. So instead, we can use another feature of Singular, which is if we hit Control-C, that will copy the layer, but also the layer's properties. So if we hit Control-V just by itself, it's gonna paste that same layer, which is the same as duplicating it with Control-D, I guess. But if we Control-C to copy, select the title, you'll find this clipboard icon on each of these properties. And if you click on the size, for example, it will paste the size values of the top box, which is where we copy the properties from. We'll do the same for the position and the anchor point. Now, of course, the text is still to the left because the alignment is set to left align. So let's set it to center align and we'll type in title. And you'll find that usually if you have a widget selected, there's going to be an additional tab on the property panel for that specific widget. And a question mark alongside it, which will take you to the article of that widget on the support portal of Singular. But yeah, for the text widget, we can set the font, for example, use a different color if we want, use a shadow, drop shadow, maybe increase the distance, blur it out a bit to soften it, and a bunch of additional settings you can tweak. But let's duplicate this and we'll call it subtitle. And actually, let's just bring it underneath the top box and above the bottom box, just so the hierarchy here matches the visual placement on the viewport. And we'll call this subtitle. And again, let's Control-C on the bottom box, go back to the subtitle under transform. Let's paste the size and the anchor point, but we still can't see it. I can toggle the bounding box. You can tell it's there, but because the color is set to white, that's why. So let's just make this. In fact, we can go to the top box, copy the fill hex code, go back to the subtitle and just paste it here. And of course, you can tweak this and make it look however you want, but let's now give it some animation. So let's go over to the animation tab and you'll see that by default, every new layer will have a fade of 0.5 seconds added to it. And we can preview what that animation looks like if we hit this button at the bottom or by hitting the space bar while hovering over the animation panel. And you'll see that it works here, but it doesn't if we go over to the effect tab. So that's just something to keep in mind. Now we can access the animation settings for each layer by right-clicking or clicking this icon. And you can even make those same changes down here. And these are animation settings for the selected layer. So you can move up and down with the arrow keys and then make changes to them down here. But what I'm gonna do is actually right-click and let's just set this to none for all of them. And instead add an animation to the group itself. So let's do translate. And then right-click again, we'll set this down. So we're saying animate in from down. Now, if we preview this, it's coming in from the bottom. Now, there are, of course, different types of animations. We can scale this in, we can rotate it, but we'll go back to translate and we'll set the duration to 0.5 seconds so it comes in faster like that. And then right-click, and we can actually tweak the easing. So there is a power 2. If you're used to working with a graph editor in After Effects, you have this easing. So it comes in very quickly and then smoothly comes to a stop. Now, if we were to set this back to linear, for example, that's just, that's ugly. In fact, let me go back to 1 second. Now, let's say I want to offset the title and subtitle to come in at different times. Right now, we're animating the entire group, so we would have to Control-C to copy, go back to the title, and then we have this clipboard icon, so paste it there. Do the same here, do the same here, and do the same here. Unfortunately, multi-actions aren't supported also, which is a bit annoying whenever you have to deal with a bunch of layers and make changes to all of them. So just something to keep in mind. And then we'll right-click here and we'll set this to none. And then we'll just offset the subtitle and the bottom box a bit. And now these come in with just a little bit of delay. In fact, we can push this a bit more. And you'll notice these, as I move them, they are snapping to a grid. And you can toggle the snap to grid up here. So now you can go and adjust it in finer increments like that. But I usually like to keep this on. Just like with percentage values, this is using seconds, so that should make things a bit easier for you to work with instead of using frames. And actually, because we are essentially creating web pages with Singular, there isn't really a frames per second limitation. The frames per second are actually defined on your output. So if you're using OBS to live stream, depending on the frames per second you're using for the output through OBS, that's how many frames are going to be generated for these graphics. And the good thing about that in comparison to After Effects, for example, is that say you're doing a show that requires outputting 30 frames per second, maybe now you want to do 60 frames per second. And in that case, you would have to go back to After Effects, change the composition settings to 60 frames per second, re-render those out, and then bring them back in, which is just a nightmare, and we've had to do that before. But now back to animating. Let's say I want to add a bit of delay to the title and subtitle as well. Well, the issue you'll see is that they're showing up outside of the boxes. And in After Effects, this would be an easy fix. We just use the boxes as alpha mats for the titles. Singular doesn't exactly have that, but there is a masking feature for groups under the Effect tab. Down here, you'll find Render Options. You can clip children. And if I select the title here, go back to Transform, this will make a bit more sense. So as I push this up, you'll see it's getting cropped inside the bounding box of the group. And in fact, I can even round those corners. And I believe it should work. Yeah, you see that works. But that's the extent to which you can mask things out. So if we want our text layers to be cropped to specific rectangles, for example, we have to approach this a bit differently. And just so it's a bit more clear, let's hide the title and subtitle first of all. And let's go to the top box. We'll reset the size on the Y for both of them, meaning they cover the entirety of that bounding box of the group. And we'll duplicate the group. We'll call it top box. We'll call this one bottom box. For the top box, we'll delete these two layers. For the bottom box, these other two layers. And I will set the top box's anchor point at the top and half the Y size, so that's 10%. And for the bottom box, we'll set the anchor point at the bottom and set the Y size to 10% as well. So the vertical size is 10% each, adding up to 20. And of course, if we select the subtitle and the title, we have to reset the size on those as well. And now we're back to what we had before visually, but now we have the luxury of being able to crop things to specific groups. So if we hide the top box, select the subtitle and we'll move it up, you'll see it's being cropped to just that group. Now back to the animation, we'll hit Control-C and let's just paste the animation on that. We'll delete it from the box itself and we'll do the same up here and we'll delete it from the top box. And let's have this start at the beginning, offset the group by 1 grid, then offset the title by 1 grid and offset the subtitle by 1 grid. So now when we play, you can see the rectangles come in first and the titles come in after. Now let's go to Effect and let's just round those corners a little bit. Now because we have split these up into separate groups, you'll see that the rounding now causes some issues. So we can switch over to per corner rounding. And let's say for the bottom box, set these top corners to 0 rounding. And then for the top box, we'll do the opposite of that. You may have noticed that there are these in and out buttons under the viewport, which trigger the in and out animation. In fact, you can do that with the composition navigator as well. If you bring that up with this button, you can even use the Control-F shortcut, and you have those same functions over here. The difference between the in and out buttons here and here is that these buttons will trigger the in and out animation of whatever subcomp you are currently in. But the good thing about the composition navigator is that you don't have to be inside of a specific comp just to preview its animations or like click space over here on the animation tab. We can go back or be in any other subcomposition and preview what that is doing from right here. But let's go back inside the lower third. And another thing is that right now the out animation is basically the reverse of our in animation. But if say you want to have a different out animation compared to the in animation, you would click this 2 timelines button. So now you can have different animations for the in and out. And what I'll do is I'll just disable all of these. And instead we'll add the animations to the groups. So again, we'll do translate down and we'll do a 0.5 duration this time. And let's set the power to 3. Let's preview that so it quickly goes away. And again, we'll Control-C to copy and paste it over here. Now you'll see that because these are two separate groups, the way they're animating is also based off of their position in space. So there's just a little bit of separation there between the two groups. So this is an instance where you would maybe disable the snap to grid and then just drag this out a bit. And you'll see it updates as you do that. And you can scrub the playhead just to see if there's any overlap. And now we can go between in and then out, in and out. Now, when it comes to Singular, there are three types of animations. There's the in and out animation, there are behavior animations, and update animations. So let's select the subtitle and go over to the behavior animation and just make sure you're on the in state to see what's going on. So instead of me talking about it, let's just go ahead and add a scale behavior animation. So basically, a behavior animation is something that happens as long as an overlay is on air. There's the opacity as well, so we can stack these, but we can't, for example, add two scale behaviors because they would conflict each other. But let's delete the opacity and focus on the scale. So first off, we have the effect. It's set to ping pong. We can set it to loop plus. So it goes to the maximum size and loops back to the minimum before it continues growing again. I'll leave this set to ping pong. Then I'll set the minimum size to 50, 100 for maximum. And let's say this would come in handy for a call to action. So maybe we'll type in, You even have some easing options here. So you can set this to power of 2. You have a duration, so how long that zooming in and zooming out lasts. So let's say 5 seconds is going to be a lot slower. And there's even a delay function. So let's set this duration to 2 seconds and say delay by 2 seconds. It's going to go from the minimum to the maximum value, stay there for 2 seconds, and then go back to minimum. Hold that value again for 2 seconds, and then go back to maximum, and so on and so forth. But I just wanted to show you that feature. It's a bit distracting, so we'll disable it for now. Now, what about images? Let's say we want to add a logo. Well, we could do it inside of this subcomp, but actually let's go back to the tutorial root subcomp and let's create a new subcomposition. We'll call this logo, go inside, and we'll add an image widget. We'll head over to the image tab, and we could either input a URL of an image, or we can click this icon to add an image from our dashboard. So if you head over to the tutorial folder, we won't see anything because there are currently no images, but we can select new, upload, and choose the YouTube logo, then double click to import it into our image widget. And then we can size down the group, remember, not the image widget itself. And let's just move the group, maybe like -40, and bring it up -40 as well. If we go over to the image, you'll notice that this is a bit distorted because it's using the fill fit mode. Now, if we change to contain, it's gonna contain that image to the bounding box of the image widget without distorting it. And then if we go cover, it's going to fit to the width of the bounding box. If we have set this to cover and use the shift value, it's gonna move it up and down. And if you use contain, it's gonna move it right and left, but this won't work with the fill method because it is just filling the entire bounding box. Then we can flip this horizontally and vertically, but I guess this logo is vertically symmetrical, so we don't see a difference. But let's go back to using the contain method, and let's head over to the animation panel. We'll delete it from the image itself, and instead we'll add it to the group. And this time we'll do from up, or maybe let's do left. Let's preview how that looks. Maybe set the power to 2. And I forgot to mention that you can switch the type of the interpolation to in and out. Now let's go back to the tutorial root subcomposition, and let's say duplicate the lower third, and we'll call this lower third small, and the other one lower third big. And we'll disable the lower third small, go inside the big one, and now we can, let's say, I want to make this a bit wider. So with the bottom box selected, let's just increase the size to maybe 75, and we'll do the same thing on the top group. And now again, because these child layers are sized relative to the group, they just automatically fill the bounding box. And now we have essentially created two lower thirds. We have one that's bigger and one that's smaller. depending on how much text we want to show. But now, if we have these both set to in animation, they're kind of on top of each other. So that's where logic layers come in. And you can find that under the Composition Navigator panel. So we can click here to create a new logic layer. And let's say call this bottom, add the L3 big to bottom as well. And now you'll see that when we bring in the big one, it will take out the small one as well. Now they are kind of overlapping with each other. So we can set a transition delay. And right now it's not using anything, but we can set it to auto, which means that it will wait for one of them to go out before bringing in the other one. You can also use a custom, which will give you the option to set a custom delay. So now when we bring in one of them, it's going to wait 1 second before bringing in the other one. And in fact, you can even input negative values here. So we'll do -1, and now it's going to bring in one of them. It's going to wait 1 second and then bring out the other one. But let's go back to auto and give that a quick test. So now during your live shows, you don't have to worry about taking one graphic out and bringing the other one in. It's going to automatically do it for you. Now, so far, we've only been designing and animating these graphics, but I would say the most fun part is being able to control these live. And the way we do that is by using control nodes. So let's go over inside the L3 small, for example. We'll bring that up. As it is now, we can go over to the text tab and change the title here. But this is the composer, and these properties aren't available to you when you create a control app. So that's why you need to create control nodes, which will show up in those control apps. So let's say underneath the control panel here, let's go over to the types of nodes. We have a bunch of them, but let's use a text node. So let's call this title, hit add. And to the right, you have the fill-in form where you would type in whatever you want. So title of this lower third. Now I'm typing here, but it's not showing up there. And that's because we need to link these up. So to connect them up, we just click on the property we want to link and then choose that control node over here. And now whatever we type in here will automatically update the text field. And you can connect control nodes to any properties that have these underlines. In fact, we can link up the color to a node by either creating a color node, so title color, hit add, or we can directly click on the color property. And if we don't choose a node, we can just call this color, hit add, it will create a node for you and automatically hook it up. So now when we change the color here, it will change the color of that text. But let's delete the color. I don't want that. We can just duplicate the title itself. We'll rename this to subtitle, and of course, link up the subtitle to it. This is the subtitle. Now, one thing to keep in mind when creating control nodes directly from the property is that, let's say we want this to be a number for some reason, I don't know, the score. So if we unlink the text and create something else, it will default to using a text control node. So for example, because the counter control node gives you some additional options, such as being able to add +1, -1, or resetting the score and then adding presets over here, maybe it would make sense for this to be linked to the score if you're going to show numbers on a scoreboard. So then, I don't know, maybe a team scores a goal, you just click this number and it adds it for you. You can reset it with this one, and then you have set buttons, presets that you can add up to 7, and also modify buttons up to 7 as well. All right, now here's another issue. If we bring up the lower third big, it still has the different titles from before. Well, what if we want to be able to control both the big lower third and the small lower third titles? Then we would have to create control nodes again and link them up, and that's just very tedious. So if you want to be able to control multiple properties with one control node, you would have to set those up on the root level, because every property can only be linked to the control nodes present inside of that subcomp. Or if we go back to the root level and create a random text control node, for example, and go back in, you see now we have root/control node, and we can switch to that and choose the random control node we created. In this case, that means that we would have to create these control nodes back in the root level. So let's quickly delete these two, go back to the root, and we'll call this title, and we'll duplicate it, subtitle, And we'll go back in, select the title, link them up back again. Make sure you're linking them up to the root. And we'll do the same thing for the subtitle. Then go back to the lower third big, do the same thing there. And now if we're in the root, we can change these. So this is the first name subtitle. And there you can see that they are both using the same title and subtitle. And if I want to, I can even add a color control node. Call this colors, hit add, bring it underneath. We'll go inside here. Let's copy this hex code, go back, paste it here, and then let's just link this up. And I believe we have to do that for the color of the subtitle. And let's do the same thing on the big one. So now look at this. We can change these colors in real time, and it applies to both lower thirds. Now, to keep things a bit more organized, we can use what are called node containers. And let's just say lower third, add, and we can bring these in to that node container. And this is what the container looks like. So you can collapse this and also set the width to small so it doesn't take up as much space. You can even add some information on the tooltip. So this is the lower third. So this would be useful in case you want to have some information there available for the operator of these graphics. Another option you have is the active checkbox, which is disabled for now. And that's because we need to select a checkbox within our group to enable and disable this node container. So we don't have one right now. We can add a checkbox control node and we'll call it active, hit add, leave it at the top there. And with the node container selected, we can choose that active checkbox, which will then use that up here. So that'll allow us to enable and disable this lower third. To take this a step further, we can even use info text. And let's say call this title and subtitle, hit add, and bring it up top. So you can see this shows up as just plain text. And you can input what that text says over here. And it even supports HTML tags. So let's just delete all of this and let's just say title and subtitle. But now we have duplicates of those. So if you go under advanced, we can hide the title of that control node so it doesn't show up here. And the title is this. Now it's only showing up what we input over here. But as I said before, it does support HTML tags. So if we go ahead and just type this in and then type this in, if you're familiar with HTML, this is where you would open and close the bold tag. So that title is now using bold weight. And now again, we're seeing duplicates of these infos. So we can go under title, hide the title of that control node in the fill-in form. And now I think looks a bit cleaner. And we could do the same for the colors. We could just grab this, duplicate it, bring it over here. Let's also type in the same here, colors. Oops, I think I have to hit return to confirm it. Oh, what is that? Oh, that's giving us an error saying that control field IDs have to be unique, which means it's conflicting with the colors control node here. So I can just say info colors, hit enter. And for this one, we'll do info title and subtitle. And again, go back here, hide the title for the color. So you can collapse this, you can enable, disable it. You can get some extra information. So you can say, put in your first name and the last name, and also toggle these on and off. Now, one thing we forgot to add was an image control node for our logo. Bring it in at the bottom here, and we'll switch to the logo subcomp. Make sure we hook that up. And of course, we have to go back here and just choose that in the dashboard again. And there it is. And again, you can choose an image from your dashboard or even paste in a link. So if we search for the Twitch logo, for example, let's say, is this PNG? No, it's not. Maybe this one? Let's go right click, copy image address and paste it over here. Yeah, that's just a scam. There's no transparency there, but you get the point. You can even input URLs of images you find online or even ones you upload to your web server, for example. Now, one thing you might have noticed is that whenever we make changes to these titles or even the logo or the color, the change happens instantly. So this is where we can use update animation. So if we have the lower third small on the in state now, we can go inside of that subcomp, select the title first, go over to the update tab and activate it. The default animation is going to be set to fade in and out with a duration of 0.5 seconds. So now when we make a change to the title, you see it's going to fade out and fade back in. Now, I don't want to fade, so let's go ahead and switch this to translate, which is to move. And on the out, I want it to move up when it goes out. And when it comes in, I want it to come in from the bottom, so down. Yes, that's right. Now, the good thing is that as it is now, the bounding box of the title is the same as the bounding box of the group. So whatever changes we make, it looks like it's being cut off properly when it moves in and out like that. But let's say we want to size down the title. So let's center the anchor point, lock these dimensions, and we'll bring it down. Then we'll go back to the root and make a change here. You can see it's getting cut off by its own bounding box. When it comes to update animations, they take into consideration the bounding box of that same layer. So what do we do in this case? I want to maybe have my title be a bit smaller, maybe even set the weight to bold. Well, instead of using the size on the transform, let's set that back to 100. We need to use what is called line height. Right now it's set to normal. Well, we can choose custom. And then if we increase this, it will basically size down. It's a bit confusing because instead of having to, maybe set it to 50%, which will make it bigger instead, you have to do, maybe 175, let's do 200, and that sizes it down a bit. But the thing is that if I quickly make a change here, back to my name, it's retaining the bounding box to be the same size as our group, which in turn gives us that illusion that it's coming out and then coming back in from the bottom of that top box. So in case you run into that issue, now you know how to fix it. Now we do need to copy the update animation. So let's hit Control-C on the title and then just paste it over here. And we'll go back to the lower third big, do the same thing. As for the logo, we can actually just do a default fade in and out animation. So if we were to change the logo like we did before by copying this scam Twitch logo, you see it faded out and then faded the YouTube logo back in. All right, so we're finally done with our graphics. We have them set up, designed, animated, and hooked up with control nodes. So now to test them out, we need to create what is called a control app. And we can do that in the dashboard by right-clicking on our composition, head to New, Control App, and then choose one of the two control apps. For this video, we're going to cover Uno Essentials because it's a bit more straightforward. And basically, there are two control apps, Studio and Uno. You can dive into Studio, check it out, see how it looks like, but we'll cover that in the future. For now, we'll just do Tutorial, Uno Control App, hit Create, and then we can double click to open it up. And here you have the preview window, you have your controls for all of your graphics, and these tabs correspond to the sub-compositions in our composition. In the control, we have kind of main controls, for turning things on and off. We can turn on the logo as well. And then for each sub-composition, we have their own individual controls. So right now we're not seeing anything else except for the same on-off switches that we have on the global controls. And that's because we didn't really create any control nodes inside of the sub-compositions. But any control nodes we create on the root level, those show up under the Customize tab. We have the title and subtitle. So if we bring back up the L3 small, we can change this to first name and hit enter to confirm. That will update it, and then do last name. Then we can change the color. Now we can go to settings, and we have a few other options here. So we can hide and show that header. We can hide or show the preview window. We can even collapse it this way. But if you want to use the entire real estate of your screen for controlling these graphics, you can do that too. But we'll bring that back in, and you can even decide to show up to 5 panels at the same time. And finally, you can enter full screen, which will hide that top bar. So in a case where you would need a lot of real estate because you have a lot of control nodes, you would even hide the preview window, and now you have your full screen to work with. And then you would use the output URL to preview what the graphics are looking like in a different screen, for example, or even on your phone. Because check this out, if I hover over the output URL, I can bring up my camera app, and then let's just say scan this and open it. You can see that I can preview those graphics directly on my phone. And now in my computer, I can toggle the logo on and off. Wait, this is a bit tricky because I'm only using one hand, but I can update these and they just update in real time on my phone. And then I can take out or bring back up the lower third big. And I can essentially use my phone as a second monitor or a preview screen. But remember that you can't copy the output URL itself and paste the link so you can output it to a new tab and maybe even bring this over to a second monitor. Now, right now, it is a bit weird because we have white graphics showing up on a white background. And there is a neat feature here. If we click on these three dots under output URL, we can choose a specific background color, which will modify the URL and copy that. So we'll have this green background color on our output URL just to see things a bit more easily. But of course, if you want to input this into your streaming software, you would use the transparent background so you can overlay the graphics on top of your live show. Now, in case you make any changes to the composition, so let's say go over to the logo and we'll set the position of the logo to the right side instead. When we switch back to the Uno Control app, we'll get this Update Composition to the latest version button. And if we click that, and it would automatically carry over those new changes. And this is just incredible because can you imagine having to do this with After Effects where you had to make a change for a graphic? You have to re-render and re-upload it to the server or wherever it is the files are being used from, re-import them into the live streaming software, and then you're ready to stream. Another cool thing is that you can actually copy the control URL as well. We have a QR code again. So let's just scan this. And you'll see that we can make changes directly from our phones. Now let's finally take a look at how we can bring this into our live streaming software. So we can grab the output URL, and this might throw you off a bit because we're seeing an inception of windows going off in the distance. It's because I'm recording the screen and showing you OBS at the same time. So let's right click and we'll add a browser source. We'll call this Singular. I will paste the link over here. Make sure the dimensions are set to 1920 by 1080 and hit OK. And then we can size this to fit the screen or right click, transform, fit to screen, or use the Control F shortcut. And those graphics are now showing up on top. Now we kind of created this the long way around by adding a browser source first and pasting the URL, setting the dimensions and all that. But let me disable this and quickly show you a little trick. All you have to do is click and drag on the output URL and drop it onto OBS, and that will create a browser source for you with the correct dimensions. Now, one thing to keep in mind is that the output URL can change from time to time. So back in our dashboard, we can head over to the output manager and we'll create a new output and we'll call this tutorial, hit create, go back to the control app. Up top here, you won't be able to see it at first. You just need to refresh the list and then it will show up. So now when you choose tutorial, this control app is now linked up with that custom output, and the URL of that output will never change. So now we can copy this output URL and put it inside the browser source input in OBS, and we will rest assured that it will never change. All right, guys, so that was it. Thank you for watching and being patient all the way through. I hope you learned something new and this Singular platform comes in handy. I really believe there's so much power inside of this Singular tool, and it's affordable at the same time, especially when you compare it to other solutions out there. They have plenty of tutorials already up on their YouTube channel in case you want to learn more. Again, stay tuned for our course. Make sure to subscribe to not miss out. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you next time.